It has been 10 years since the first Iron Man movie. 10 years since the Marvel Cinematic Universe burst into our universe. 19 movies later, and it is not showing any signs of fatigue. In fact, it is stronger than ever, with almost every recent MCU movie becoming a cultural event. In this video, we are going to try to figure out why they are succeeding, what it is that Marvel is doing right. And one way we'll do that is by comparing it to two other cinematic universes that are also going on at the moment, and are getting it very, very wrong. Namely, the DC universe and the Star Wars universe. Those of you who have been regularly watching my videos know that universes are something that has been on my mind for a while. My claim is that contemporary pop culture is characterized by the creation of universes, and I predicted that these universes will play an increasingly large part in our lives in the future, perhaps even larger than that of the so-called real world. So the creation of universes now becomes a form of art. Kevin Feige, and the creative team around him, seem to be the first true masters of this new form. In the latter part of this video, I intend to develop this idea. So stick around if you want to have your universes expanded, and get a glimpse into the marvelous future that awaits us. My main field of exploration, as you know, is pop culture. I am quite unique in that, because academics usually explore high culture to comment on the spirit of the time. They are often derisive of those who waste their time on popular mediums like superhero comic books, instead of reading fine literature. They lament the degradation of the spirit which deals with such idle stuff, instead of reading the classics, which deal with loftier themes. Like for instance the Greek mythology, which is about superheroes like Hercules, Perseus and Achilles fighting against monsters and demigods. In other words, just like the comic books. It can actually be claimed that the superhero comic books are the truest descendants we have to the Greek and Nordic mythologies. The spirit of the time is actually contained in the popular mediums. The stories of the Greek mythology were actually the popular culture of ancient Greece. Now within this culture, there were some great poets and playwrights, like Homer, Ovid and Euripides, and they took this material and made great art out of it. And their masterpieces were elevated over the years, and became considered high culture. Once the medium itself is elevated to the status of high art, it pretty much stops producing masterpieces. It becomes a medium that no longer evolves, and is no longer connected to the spirit of the time. In a previous video I pointed out that cinema now seems to be at this stage, where it has reached its final form, and is a high art medium that is no longer creative. But this final form can now be used for other types of creativity, and this is what we see with the MCU. The creative process of pop culture is now in creating universes, and cinema plays a part in it. So if we want to explore the spirit of our time, this is where we should turn our gaze. This is what I aim to do in this video. Now I should note that I came to these movies fresh. Comic books are one aspect of American pop culture that didn't make it to my country, so I was unfamiliar with the Marvel Universe. Before the MCU, I knew a little bit about Spider-Man, Captain America and the Hulk, and that's it. So for me the entire journey has been a revelation. When I judge the MCU, then, I judge it on its own merit, without a previous baggage of knowledge. From this point of view, the MCU seems vastly superior to the DCU, and even more to the new Star Wars movies, those made after Disney purchased Lucasfilm. I know that not everyone is happy with the MCU, and some of the criticisms are legit, but let's face it, comparing the complaints made against the MCU with the complaints against DCU and Star Wars is like comparing first world problems with third world problems. So let's try to figure out what Kevin Feige is doing right, and the others are doing wrong. Let's begin with some obvious stuff, starting with casting. The casting of the Marvel movies has been fantastic throughout. I haven't seen any major complaints against any of the actors casted. Every one of the actors and actresses has owned their characters, and some of the performances have been iconic. By iconic I mean that we now associate the character with the actor. When we hear the names Iron Man, Captain America, Black Widow, Thor, Loki and Thanos, I believe that most of us now see them in our mind's eye in the forms of Downey, Evans, Johansson, Hemsworth, Hiddleston and Brolin. Others can be argued to be iconic as well. On top of that, there's the casting of the secondary characters, those that appear in only one movie. Marvel seems to make it a point to cast these roles with actors that are known to be awesome, even if it's just cameo roles. It's got to the point where I started guessing who is going to be cast next. How come Michael Keaton has not been cast yet? Oh, there's Michael Keaton. I wonder if Ving Rhames will make an appearance, and here he is. When is Peter Dinklage going to show up? Oh, here we go. Here are some other actors and actresses I'm expecting to see in the MCU movies in the future. I'm assuming anyone who is part of the DCU is out of the picture, as well as those involved in the X-Men franchise. I'm also assuming that we're not gonna see Clint Eastwood. But that still leaves quite a lot of awesomeness to pick from. Let's see how many of these will show up in the future. In contrast, the DC movies have made some truly dubious casting choices, and I don't think they worked. With the exception of Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, I have not seen any one of the performances generate any enthusiasm. And I think the jury is still out on whether this Wonder Woman will become iconic. Compared with Marvel, the DC casting has been an abysmal failure. With Star Wars, the casting hasn't really been the problem. After The Force Awakens, it even looked like the new characters have the potential to become iconic. But the following movies pretty much destroyed that potential, as well as doing some serious damage to past icons. The reason why this has happened is something that we shall discuss, but I think there is a wide consensus that it is not the fault of the actors. Another thing that the MCU does well is presenting the characters to us. With some characters, like Iron Man, Captain America and Doctor Strange, we got an origin story. With Spider-Man, the Hulk and Thor, the creators wisely assumed that we know enough about them, so we joined them after they already got their power, but still have to learn how to control it. Some heroes, like Hawkeye, Winter Soldier and Scarlet Witch, are presented to us first as foes who fight against the Avengers, and we learn to admire and fear their powers before they turn good. And some, like Black Widow, Black Panther and Falcon, are presented to us first as humans, and then we learn that they also have powers. It's all built integrally into the story, and there is no time wasted on explaining who these heroes are. In contrast, the DC movies have done an awful job. Long moments are spent on boring descriptions of the superheroes and what they can do, killing the pace of the movies, and it also takes out the fun of discovering their powers. It's mind-boggling that after the MCU showed how to do it right, they botch it so badly. I can't explain it. Yet another brilliant thing done by Marvel is the way in which they drew boys and girls into the franchise. Iron Man was the first Avenger to be introduced, and had a full trilogy early on in the series. The trilogy was specifically aimed at boys, giving them Tony Stark, a successful billionaire who has lots of cool toys, and gets all the chicks. Leslie Bibb, Scarlett Johansson and Rebecca Hall played the sexy vixens for you to fantasize about, and Pepper Potts is the perfect girlfriend. It's the ultimate male fantasy, a total honey trap to get all the teenage boys into it. The girls, meantime, got the first two Thor movies. The hero is a cute and nerdy female scientist, looking remarkably like Natalie Portman, who comes across this guy who seems like a wild brute, while also being an incredible hunk. Slowly, she tames him, and he turns out to be an amazing and loving guy. In the end, he is even revealed to be an actual prince. So it's a combination of a romance novel and a fairy tale, the ultimate female fantasy aimed at drawing the girls in. On top of that they also get Loki, the perennial sexy bad boy. It worked like a charm, and Tumblr went crazy. There was actually a subculture of Tumblr girls who imagined themselves to be the brides of Thor and Loki. So early on, Marvel already had the nerd boys and the nerd girls hooked in, creating a fan base. Then came the first Avengers movie, a fun romp that brought the general public in, and the franchise was on its way. The same type of cleverness can be found in how the MCU movies started out by giving us something familiar, and then gradually took us into the fantastic world of Marvel. The first movie, Iron Man, was realistic, planted in the world of American involvement in Middle Eastern wars, and remaining in the realm of science. The next few movies also started out rooted in science, but then expanded the known world. Stark technology aided in creating Captain America, and we learn that science can enhance human abilities and create superheroes. Dr. Bruce Banner tried to recreate that experiment, but it went wrong and turned him into the Hulk, and we learn that humans can mutate into inhuman superheroes. And Thor begins with scientists to explore astronomical divergences, and find out that aliens exist and visit our world. So we are slowly being led from our known universe into the Marvel universe, and once we are there, we can expand it more and more. Spider-Man moves in the domain of millennial teenagers. Black Panther whisks us away to Africa. Agent Carter throws us back to the 1940s. Thor and the Guardians take us on a tour through the wonders of the galaxy. Ant-Man guides us through the realm of the little things, and Doctor Strange introduces us to the multiverse. With the magic of today's cinema, where everything can be brought to life with CGI, it is quite a wonderland. The TV show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. brings a lot of it together, and explains the connection between everything. That's another thing I like about Marvel. They take time to tie things up and to make sense. We actually get an explanation as to how come the world is suddenly full of superheroes, when it wasn't before. Basically, aliens have been visiting Earth, and they left some technology here, as well as manipulating human DNA to give humans potential to mutate. Today, when humanity reached a certain scientific and technological ability, it has learned how to use this alien technology, and in that it also released that latent genetic potential. And this, in turn, draws aliens to visit or attack Earth. By taking time to explain all that, the creators of the Marvel Universe not only help it make sense, but also make it feel based in our world. In contrast, I have no idea where the DC Universe is going. It all seems rushed, with no time taken to flesh out the stories or tie them together. Since we are only 5 movies in, there is still time to save it, and bring everything in line. But seeing how shambolic the whole creative process has been until now, I am not optimistic. And those problems are nothing compared to the colossal disaster that is Star Wars. The creators got a universe that was already fleshed out, the greatest franchise in cinema history. All they had to do was to build upon what was already there. Instead, the new movies are not true to the old movies. The Last Jedi threw away most of the things that The Force Awakens set up, and Solo told a story no one was interested in hearing. If the DCEU seems to be suffering from bad planning, Star Wars seems to have no plan at all. We find the same successful formula of starting from the familiar and then slowly expanding on it, with how the MCU is handling an issue that is quite a minefield at the moment: diversity. In short, what we mean when we talk about diversity is that we expect that not all heroes will be of the traditional type, i.e. American white heterosexual men, but that we get a diverse cast of heroes, and that the depiction of these other characters should avoid the old stereotypes that Western society had of them. A diverse cast is good for the movie, as it enables the creators to expand the story and make it richer in themes and conflicts. It is also good for expanding the audience, as more people can find a hero they can identify with. So it seems that diversity is good on all fronts. Where is the problem then? Well, let's take a little tour through history. The talk around diversity began in the 1960s. Until then, it was believed that Western white culture was the most progressed culture, the one that is leading us on our way to creating a perfect human society. It was therefore only natural that the hero should be the white man, the leader of this progress, with his woman at his side. Other ethnicities represented regression, and therefore could not be heroes, could not be role models. In the 60s, however, this perception began to change. The new idea was that the other cultures also have something to contribute, and that the best human society would actually be a pluralistic and diverse society. Comic books, usually created by people who are liberally minded, took part in this change. However, this is not something that you can just decide to do. This required a long cultural process. When it came to black people, for instance, the general public still perceived them as primitive, as people who are less advanced, so it wasn't easy selling them as heroes. One solution was to present them as exotic, and in 1966 Marvel introduced Black Panther, a superhero that hailed from a mysterious African country. Another way was to present a hero that was dark-skinned in look but all-American in character. And in '69, Marvel presented Sam Wilson, the Falcon, a wholesome African-American character who teamed up with Captain America. Other mediums of pop culture did the same, and in time the audience got comfortable with black heroes, which gave the creators license to diversify their character. By the 90s, black actors became so popular that the biggest badass in American cinema was Samuel L. Jackson, and in the early 2000s, Marvel took the character of Nick Fury, previously a white man, and changed it into an African-American modeled after Jackson's look and style. In such ways, pop culture helped create a more diverse society. And so, when the Marvel movies were made, they already had the freedom to present a variety of black characters. Again, they start with the familiar, so most superheroes are white American men. But among them they could insert many black heroes, including casting Samuel L. Jackson himself to play Nick Fury. The black characters are there not to fill a quota or make a political statement, but for purely artistic reasons. The Iron Man movies, for instance, gain a lot from the character of Rhodey, with Don Cheadle's black man swagger playing perfect counterbalance to Tony Stark's white man swagger. The battle to open the door for blacks is over, and we can now focus on the good that they can bring. Same goes for women. In the past, women had to overcome many prejudices to show that they can be the type of characters who can be the superhero, not just the superhero's girl. We see an MCU manifestation of that in Peggy Carter, the woman who founded S.H.I.E.L.D. in the 1940s. She is a total badass, and she had to be in order to make it in a man's world. But in the movies set in today's world, women don't have to be so tough in order to be leaders and heroes. The characters of Pepper Potts, Jane Foster and Helen Cho are not badasses, and yet they are well respected and successful in their fields, and play a part in defeating the bad guys. This, again, gives the creators freedom to create a diverse cast of female characters, and focus on what type would best fit the story. These identity politics around blacks and women were an important part of pop culture since the 60s. Later, we started to talk about other identities as well, such as Latino, Asian and LGBT identities. Because of that, these identities started to become superheroes in comics only recently, and the MCU doesn't have much of a pool to draw from. The TV show Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is already bringing in heroes from other countries and ethnicities, but the movies are still relying, and cleverly so, on the more familiar characters. We are probably going to see these other identities being gradually weaved into the movies as well. It's already starting to happen, although there are still difficulties to overcome. The character of Wong, for instance, is a stereotypical Asian in the comics, so the movies had to somewhat change his character. In general, the MCU manages to avoid stereotypes, except one. All of the German characters are invariably mad scientists. I realize that it's a relic of the post-war years, when these characters were formed, but German people do other things, you know. But apart from that, the MCU has been good. So, if everything is so good, where is the problem? Well, the problem is that identity politics have been hijacked by the radical left, in the form of the social justice movement. The social justice ideology regards the whole issue of identity through the prism of class warfare. It believes that Western society is structured in a way that favors men over women, whites over non-whites, and straights over LGBT. Therefore, all of this progress that I just described is irrelevant in its eyes, and is just changes made on the surface. The only way to achieve true equality and diversity is to destroy the current system. The social justice warriors are usually very ignorant about history and culture, so they don't understand all the problems and struggles of the past, and see it all as expressions of systemic racism, sexism and homophobia. And so, the process I described, in which we start with familiar identities and then diversify, is not good enough for them. They want to destroy the familiar, since it is based on the existing order. So the way the MCU is going is not what they want to see. This ideology is based on the idea that human traits are not the result of human biology, but are constructed by society. The social justice warriors believe that the system is constructing males to have different traits from females, whites to have different traits from blacks, etc. And they are constructed in a way that gives one group identity an advantage over the other. Therefore, to achieve social justice, we must change the culture that is constructing us in such a way. SJWs thus regard art as a way to reshape people's minds. They don't judge movies by aesthetic criteria. They want movies to be part of the ideological battle to bring down the liberal system. We saw a manifestation of that after the second Avengers movie, Age of Ultron, came out. The movie was made by Joss Whedon, who is himself very sympathetic to the social justice movement. But Whedon also understands art and puts it above his ideological leanings. This, of course, infuriated the SJWs, who saw him as a traitor. One problem that they had was with the moment when Black Widow expresses her feeling that she is less human because she was forcefully sterilized. Since SJWs perceive art as propaganda, they think that anything a character says is the message that the movie is trying to convey, so they saw this as conveying the message that the woman is made less human when she's barren. They also saw this as blaming the victim for something that was done to her. Another problem they had, again with Black Widow, was a part in the movie when she falls captive and gets rescued by the male Avengers. The SJW saw this as strengthening the stereotype that the woman in action movies can only play the role of damsel in distress. Now, you might be wondering at this, since Black Widow kicks ass throughout this movie, and her captivity is just a small segment. But you must remember how social justice warriors think. The idea is that society is constructing us, shaping our subconscious to think of men and women in a certain way. SJWs thus demand that movies be dedicated to break this conditioning, and so they can't tolerate even the smallest infraction. If it was just about social justice warriors spurging out on Twitter, it would be funny. But they cause actual harm to the art of movie making. It appears that the social justice ideology has infiltrated Lucasfilm, and is playing a crucial part in destroying the Star Wars franchise. At least, this is what it feels like to many fans. This could be the reason why female characters like Rey and Rose have no flaws, and always say the right thing, making them extremely boring characters. It could also be the reason why The Last Jedi seems to be telling us that traits like individualism, rebelliousness and daring, traditionally seen as male traits, are bad and need to be repressed. And it's hard to shake the suspicion that this ideology is the reason why this movie seems to be doing everything in its power to destroy Luke Skywalker, one of the greatest white male heroes in cinema history. What was once an epic saga about heroes has now been turned into a story about how heroism is bad. It's also hard for me to shake another suspicion I have about this movie, centered around Admiral Holdo. Holdo, as we all noticed, looks like an SJW. Secondly, she is a terrible leader who behaves in a totally inexplicable manner, and we are obviously meant to feel animosity towards her. But then, it is revealed that she was right all along, even though we never get an explanation for her weird behavior. It's as if the creators knew how much SJWs are hated in society, and thought that in this way, they will somehow connect to that part of our brain that makes us feel this revulsion, and then break our conditioning to hate SJWs. I truly want to believe that they can't be that dumb that they think that this is how the human mind works, but I can't find any other way to explain that god-awful storyline. Please tell me that they cannot be so ideologically driven that they would create such a bad plot for something as idiotic as that. The Marvel comics have also been infiltrated by social justice, resulting in some awful stories and characters that alienate the fans. But the MCU seems immune. It operates on the assumption that what makes you bad are your choices and actions, not the identity you were born with. I'm constantly dreading the moment when social justice will infect the Marvel movies as well, but so far it didn't happen. There has been only one project in the universe that was destroyed by this ideology, and that is the TV series Agent Carter. It could have been an inspiring story of a woman making it in a man's world, but sadly, all the white men around Peggy Carter are not just caricatures of male chauvinism, they are also completely incompetent and inferior to women in every possible way. And that, of course, just ends up diminishing the accomplishments of our female hero. It's a real shame, too, because the show had wonderful style, bringing the 1940s to life with elements of film noir, a swinging soundtrack, and a hero that is like a combination of Katharine Hepburn and Lorraine Bacall. All of that is great, but where were the Humphrey Bogarts and Spencer Tracys? The show did have one Clark Gable type in the form of Howard Stark, but that wasn't enough to save it, and it was cancelled after 2 seasons. Agent Carter, like the new Star Wars, attests to what happens when you let ideologues have control over the creative process. In contrast, Kevin Feige and his MCU team are dedicated to making art, and so they can present what is, to my mind, the best thing about the Marvel movies, their thematic continuity and development. Every movie stands alone and can be enjoyed as a complete art piece, but there are also arcs that span several movies, and every one of these arcs contains themes which every movie explores in its own way. This is unprecedented in the history of cinema, and deserves special attention. Let's see how this is done. The first few movies, as already mentioned, focus on scientists who are exploring new bold theories. The result of their explorations is the possession of great power, and the movies ask, who should have that power? Should the scientists give it to the government, to the private section, or keep it to themselves? In Iron Man, the villain is a private industry man, who wants to be rich and powerful, so he makes deals with terrorists, while the US government is basically the good guys. Tony Stark decides eventually to work with the government, but not for it. In The Incredible Hulk, the US Army does shady stuff that ends up creating an evil monster. That's why Bruce Banner does everything to prevent his powers from falling into the hands of the government. In Iron Man 2, we once again meet a power-hungry and immoral industry man, but this time the government is working with him. Colonel Rhodes still believes that the government is good, and he works on its behalf to steal Iron Man's secrets and become War Machine. But then he realizes that he is serving the bad guys. What saves the day here is the private section, in the form of Iron Man. In Captain America, Steve Rogers is an idealist who believes that the US government is a force of good, but the system lets him down. This makes our heroes suspicious of S.H.I.E.L.D., a government arm, but after all they've learned, they realize that you can't expect any system to be all good, so they agree to work with it to protect Earth. In the process, we see our heroes go through personal growth. All the villains in this period fall for the lure of power, until it corrupts and consumes them, and eventually destroys them. The challenge to our heroes is to mature and be able to handle power. In the Iron Man trilogy, we see Tony starting out as an arms dealer who doesn't care about the consequences of his actions, but when he is faced with those consequences, he takes responsibility, and transforms his company into a company dedicated to maintaining peace. He also stops being a playboy and enters a stable relationship with Pepper, and starts to develop his human side over his Iron Man side. Pepper also grows, from a shy and insecure assistant into a confident and assertive boss. In the first two Thor movies, Thor starts out as a vain, impetuous and reckless young god, but then he matures, and realizes that he has a responsibility to protect the Nine Realms. He ends up abdicating the throne, because he realizes power corrupts and he isn't ready to deal with it yet. Captain America, meanwhile, learns to tone down his idealism and become more realistic, and Bruce Banner learns to control his rage. This maturation helps them avoid the pitfalls that the villains fall into, and prepares them for the moral dilemmas that they'll have to face in the future movies. Villains like Loki and Red Skull believe that only the powerful should have personal freedom, while the rest should bow to them. In contrast, our heroes believe in individual freedom for everyone, and use their power to protect it. They are all individualists who despise authority, and Nick Fury knows that they won't be put in a frame, but he cleverly manipulates them to band together as a team, and they realize that this makes them more powerful. This theme is also explored in Guardians of the Galaxy, where we see a group of individualist misfits overcome the initial hostility to each other and team up to defeat evil. They all have a lot of pain that made them close themselves up and become selfish, but once they find friendship, they connect to their benevolent side. In Iron Man 3, Tony is without his suit, but his newly acquired ability for teamwork helps him overcome the problem. Working as a team, the heroes can defeat the powerful but selfish villains that they are facing. These movies show us how bad war can be, and gradually we are also dealing with the aftermath. Tony Stark and Dr. Selvig both suffer from PTSD after stopping Loki's attack on New York, and we are also introduced to Sam Wilson, a former soldier who is running a support group for soldiers with PTSD. Because of that, our heroes now try to use their power to bring peace. Iron Man 2 begins with Tony announcing that he had privatized world peace, Thor 2 begins with Thor bringing peace to the Nine Realms, and Guardians of the Galaxy begins with a peace treaty between Xandar and the Kree. But there's always someone who isn't made for these piping times of peace, and lays plots. Our heroes thus try to preempt these villains. In The Avengers and Winter Soldier we see S.H.I.E.L.D. using alien technology to protect world peace, and Age of Ultron shows Stark doing the same. But that opens the door to Loki, Hydra and Ultron to use this power to try to achieve their version of peace, which includes eliminating all individuality or even humanity. Our heroes learn of the danger of wielding authoritarian power, even if your goal is to protect the peace. Now that our heroes are mature and responsible, and try to bring peace, they have to deal with sins and failures of the past. In Iron Man 2, Tony has to deal with the problem that his father created, and in Iron Man 3 and Age of Ultron he has to deal with the consequences of his own wild past. Thor has to deal with the failure of Asgard to kill Malekith 1,000 years ago. Cap has to deal with his failure to save Bucky and destroy Hydra, and S.H.I.E.L.D. has to deal with allowing Hydra to infiltrate it. Our heroes find that you can't bury your shady past, that there will always be consequences. The conclusion is presented by Black Widow, who bravely owns and exposes her own dark past at the end of Winter Soldier, knowing that she will win because the villains have a darker past. Another theme explored in this period is chaos versus order. Malekith is a villain who wants to destroy creation and plunge the universe back into chaos, whereas Hydra wants to create chaos so that the people will crave order and accept authoritarian rule. Our heroes have to realize that, as Vision says, it is wrong to think that chaos and order are opposites. To maintain freedom, you have to find the right combination. This period is dominated by a new type of villain. Before, we saw villains who had a god complex and wanted individual power. Now, we are beginning to see villains who are more like Satan, controlling things behind the scenes. Thanos tries to exploit Loki's and Ronan's god complex to get what he wants. Killian hides behind the Mandarin, and manipulates people's weaknesses to have his way. And Hydra operates like a parasite within S.H.I.E.L.D. To fight such villains, our heroes need to be sneaky as well. Captain America always thought that honesty is the best way of action, and was critical of Nick Fury's craftiness, but he realizes that in today's world there are many grey areas, and craftiness is sometimes needed to protect freedom and peace. As the double agent Natasha tells the Congress, people like her endanger the world, but also protect it. As the audience, we have to come to terms with the idea that our heroes have some darkness in them. S.H.I.E.L.D. seems at first to be the good guys, as opposed to the shadiness we saw in parts of the industry and government. Now, we find that S.H.I.E.L.D. was also doing shady stuff, and that this opened the door to Hydra. This causes Natasha and other agents to have a crisis of faith, a crisis that is richly developed in the excellent first 2 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Faced with this, Captain America completes his transformation. He started out as a selfless idealist who wanted to give himself to the system. Now, he is an individualist rebel who will do anything to save one soul, his friend Bucky, but he has no scruples about completely destroying S.H.I.E.L.D., destroying the corrupt system. With this realization that they have a dark side, our heroes ask themselves if they are monsters. This theme is explored a little in Guardians of the Galaxy, but gets its full development in the Avengers movies. In the first Avengers, Loki thinks that the Hulk is a lower being for being a monster, but Tony tells Bruce to embrace the Hulk like he embraces Iron Man. In Iron Man 3, however, we see Tony deciding to remove the iron parts from his body, and focus on being human. But later, in Age of Ultron, he realizes that his humanity has a monstrous side as well. In this movie, several Avengers say that they feel like monsters. Bruce for being the Hulk, Natasha for being brought up as an assassin, Steve for being a man out of time, Tony for being a mad scientist. Ultron, on his part, thinks that since humans have a dark side, it means that they are all monsters that should be eradicated. But then, the Avengers combine their powers to create Vision, a Frankenstein's monster, and find out that monsters can actually be good. In the end, Bruce jumps ship because he's too afraid of what his monster side might do, whereas Natasha and the Maximoffs choose to dedicate their freakiness in the service of good. This theme is also intertwined with the theme of guilt. Our heroes all feel guilt for things that they did in the past, mainly Winter Soldier, Scarlet Witch and Yondu. But this theme revolves mainly around Tony Stark, who becomes a tragic figure, repeatedly trying to do good but only making things worse. His arc is in the opposite direction to that of Steve Rogers. While Cap moves from being an idealist soldier to an individualist rebel, Tony moves from being an individualist playboy to someone who wants to be put in a frame. In Civil War, this leads them to clash. But Tony's real problem is that he never dealt with the guilt that he feels for his relations with his parents, and that is exploited by Zemo to make him explode in rage and break up the Avengers. In this period where heroes try to figure out what it means to be human, we see villains of a new type, non-human and regarding humanity as something that should be transcended. Ultron, Dormammu, Hive and Ego offer to free humanity from traits like mortality, variability and fallibility, claiming that we are better off without them. They even get some humans to believe in their gospel. But our heroes choose to embrace these aspects of their humanity, realizing that we are better off with them. We also get a few new origin movies, which return to some of the earlier themes. Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man and Black Panther go through the same challenges and dilemmas we previously encountered, but with some differences. Doctor Strange, for instance, starts out as a brilliant individualist driven by his huge ego, like the young Tony Stark. But then, to get his powers, he needs to learn to let go of his self entirely, and become part of the stream of being. He finds a balance that maintains his individuality, but in the end of the movie is ready to sacrifice himself and suffer eternal torture for the sake of humankind. Another theme introduced in this period is parenthood. In the early movies, we mainly saw our heroes struggling to step from under the shadow of the overbearing father, as part of the maturation process. Now that they are mature, they are ready to be parents themselves. In Age of Ultron we find out that Hawkeye has wife and kids, which is why he is more grounded and doesn't feel like a monster. The other Avengers are envious, and Tony thinks of having a family with Pepper. In the meantime, we see him acting as a father figure to Peter Parker, trying to be a better father than his father was, and he actually ends up feeling like a proud dad. In Ant-Man we see three fathers trying to do their best for their daughters, and making mistakes. And in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, our heroes learn that family isn't necessarily a biological thing, and that they are actually a family. We also return to the theme of power and responsibility, but in a deeper way. Hank Pym and the people of Wakanda want to hide the dangerous power from the world, but realize that you can't stop power, you can only make sure that it is in good hands. Meanwhile, Thor and T'Challa are reluctant to take the throne, but realize that this creates a vacuum that invites rulers who abuse the power. We learn that having power gives you responsibility to use it to fight against evil, which is of course the perfect cue to introduce Spider-Man into the MCU mix. Peter Parker feels compelled to use his power to fight for good, even at the expense of his personal happiness. However, in Age of Ultron and Doctor Strange, we see that even if the power is used by good people with good intentions, it can still lead to bad results. In the aftermath, the Avengers are faced with the demand to put their power under supervision, and the dilemma is, what is the responsible thing to do in this case? In Civil War, we see each Avenger dealing with this dilemma, and answering it based on what they learned in previous movies. The MCU seems to be taking quite a bold stance on the issue of power. In postmodernist thought, power is usually considered to be inherently bad, something to be ashamed of. The superheroes in comic books often have to deal with a world that is ungrateful and suspicious of them, because they have power. That's one reason why they hide their identity. The DCEU movies still have this mindset, but the MCU movies say something else. You should not be ashamed of your power, but use it to do good, even if some people hate you for it. From Iron Man to Black Panther, the MCU movies end with the superheroes revealing their identity and power, and proudly owning them. This theme also serves as an allegory for American imperialism. America is also a superpower that tries to use its power to do good, but sometimes ends up doing damage. In the process of saving the world, we see the Avengers bringing destruction and misery to places in Eastern Europe and Africa, and breeding animosity towards them. We also see Western imperialism that is done for purely cynical and selfish reasons, in the form of Ulysses Klaue. The issue of imperialism is really fleshed out in Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther, where heroes have to deal with a villain who takes over their country and wants to use its power for imperialist conquest. They fight back because their arc has taught them that power should be used to help and protect others, not to conquer them. Within this world where good and bad are not so clear, we get a new type of villain. Until now, we met villains who always represented the wrong side of the issue. But villains like Zemo, Caecilius, Toomes and Killmonger are part of the debate, and hold part of the truth. They are not one-dimensional, but fleshed-out characters that are dealing with the same dilemmas we saw our heroes dealing with. And their answers, while ultimately bad, do have rational justifications, and make you think. And this leads us to Infinity War, where the villain is actually the protagonist. Thanos, just like our heroes, feels that his power compels him to do something good, and there is something sympathetic about him. But here we get to feel what it's like to be on the receiving end of such idealist power, because Thanos would do anything to achieve his goal, and he forces our heroes to watch their loved ones die, or even actively sacrifice them, or even kill them themselves. After a decade of watching these characters struggle and grow, we feel every bit of their loss and pain, and the result is gut-wrenching. There are many other themes that I didn't mention, but you get the picture. This is what the creation of a cinematic universe can give you, the ability to explore themes from many perspectives. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is created with movies and TV shows, but it also spans other mediums, like comic books that are based in the stories of the movies. What I'm saying is that we are witnessing the rise of a new artistic medium, in which the artist is creating a universe. The universe is a multi-medium art form, and once it is fully formed, it will span more mediums. And further into the future, as we shall soon discuss, I see these universes becoming a bigger part of our lives. This is one reason why I explore pop culture. It gives you an inkling of the future. The interesting mediums of pop culture are those mediums that have always been considered mere entertainment, but then, because of a change in the culture, become mediums that convey the spirit of the time. The general public still consumes the mediums as entertainment, but some of its pieces are actually art. Let's take literature as an example. There were numerous novels written ever since the invention of print, but almost none that were written before the 19th century are considered art. What brought the change? Well, the late 18th century is the time we identify as the beginning of the modern age. Before that, man was trying to figure out how to fit in the divine order. In the modern age, the idea was that man is progressing towards creating the perfect order, an enlightened society. This gave rise to the human sciences, like psychology and sociology, which sought to understand man in order to perfect him. And literature, the medium that is best suited to describe human psychology and sociology, and tell stories of progress and growth, therefore became a form of art, one of the central art forms of the modern age. But it takes time until human consciousness catches up and realizes what the art is trying to say. So for a while, the medium is still considered nothing but a popular medium, and is looked down upon by the high culture guardians. Only towards the end of the 19th century, when the human sciences asserted themselves as academic fields, did literature start to be taken seriously. What follows then is a period in which the medium is still popular, but also respected as an art form. This is usually the period when the greatest masterpieces are created. But it is also a period in which the artists themselves start to take themselves seriously, and they slowly move away from what they perceive as the popular aspects of their medium. This period of the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th is what I shall define as the modernist period. The period is typified by the idea that in order to achieve progress, we need to completely break away from the past. Modernist literature, poetry, music, plastic art, architecture all aspire to throw away all conventions and traditions, seeing them as holding art back from expressing the truth. Modern art was still in its popular phase, but the artists were already beginning to develop snobbery. In the decade between the mid-1910s and the mid-1920s, a paradigm shift occurred, and we entered what I shall call the jazz period. The modernist idea that you can break away completely from the past and impose your truth on the world now became part of mainstream politics, in the form of totalitarian fascist and communist regimes. Modernist art became high culture and started to detach from popular culture. But within it, there were already many artists and movements that were using their art to express the collapse of the modern dream of progress. Popular culture, in the meantime, started to create new mediums. First, there was radio, that was connecting people who were previously geographically separated. Amateur radio stations already started to pop up in the modernist period, but in the 1920s radio became regulated, and certified radio stations started to offer music, comedy, drama, and other entertainment. It was heavily controlled by the authorities, which were trying to use it to instill their values. But their subjects still found subversive ways to express and connect, either by pirate stations or even within the established stations themselves. One way was through popular music, which became an entirely new game now that music could be recorded. Until then, the only way to market music was with written sheets, which gave the advantage to classical music. But once the record player was invented, the creative process started to shift away from writing, and towards performing and recording. In the pop music of the jazz period, a completely new way of judging music was formed, a way that focused on the type of ecstatic experiences it can produce. And because of that, a new mentality arose. Instead of the modern mentality that was dedicated to progress towards the perfect world, the jazz mentality was about enjoying life in the modern world, finding ways to turn the here and now into the most exciting and uplifting existence. This was the American alternative to the totalitarian regimes that came out of the modernist spirit. Another popular medium that arose in that period was cinema. The cinema of Hollywood, like jazz, was mainly about enjoying the modern world, but the focus was on personalities. In the Hollywood star system, the actors would have one image, one persona that they would play in every movie they made. These personas became role models, which people all over the world tried to imitate. Thus, Hollywood offered different attitudes and styles to negotiate the modern world. In the middle of the jazz period, the US began to clash with the totalitarian regimes, and one result was what is known as the Golden Age of comic books. This was when the first superheroes were introduced, and the rules of the superhero genre were set. Being of that period, the superheroes were proudly American, representing the values of American freedom and fighting against those who stood for other values. In the decade after World War II, the world polarized into two camps. The Eastern Bloc still believed in the modernist idea that humans can figure out the truth about man, and impose a perfect society. The Western Bloc started to be dominated by the American way of life, with its jazzy values. In the US, this led to the belief that America can form the best possible society, and the government tried to direct the population towards that goal, not in a totalitarian manner, but still quite authoritarian. But the youth had a different mentality, and between the mid-1950s and the mid-1960s, this led to another paradigm shift, and we entered what I shall call the rock and roll period. During this time, all the traditional art forms, painting, sculpture, classical music, theater, poetry, fine literature, architecture, all completely disconnected from popular culture, and closed themselves in bubbles where they are understood only by aficionados. As a result, they also completely detached from the spirit of the time, and have no connection to what's going on in the world. The people involved in those mediums realized that the modern project had collapsed, but they failed to detect the alternative that pop culture was offering. Thus, they defined the period as postmodern, and got stuck in meaninglessness. Popular culture, on the other hand, began to develop self-awareness, and to realize that what it had to offer was better. Basically, this is when the pop consciousness started to arise. While jazz music started to regard itself as high art and followed the aforementioned mediums into irrelevance, rock and roll became the medium that carried the spirit of the time. If the experience of the jazz period was about getting into the swing of modern life, in rock and roll it was about bursting out of it. The modern story of progressing towards a perfect society no longer held sway, and instead we started thinking about creating subcultures, where like-minded people could get together and create their own world. With the eruptive power of rock and roll, kids could rebel against the modern framework, find each other by following the same rock stars, and form their own cultures. Another popular medium that went through a major shift at the time was science fiction and fantasy literature. Science fiction was popular since the modernist period, but it existed as pure entertainment, or as something that was used by novelists of fine literature to convey philosophical and political messages. But now that the future was no longer certain, and kids were searching other worlds to escape to, it became an art form, a genre of great depth and popular appeal. With fine literature gradually constraining itself, It was sci-fi and fantasy that took its place as the literary expression of the spirit of the time. In comic books, this was the beginning of the Silver Age. The American government, as part of its attempt to regulate society, imposed a code on comic books, and the freedom enjoyed during the Golden Age was curbed. But comic books survived by connecting to the emerging youth culture. The superheroes, whose popularity waned after the Nazis were defeated, got revamped and adapted to the rock and roll mind. They were no longer perfect role models, but flawed characters, dealing with the angst and problems that the youth were dealing with. And the themes became less magic and more science fiction. There was also greater emphasis on making all the plot lines part of the same grand narrative, all belonging to the same universe. Thus, they laid the ground for the cinematic universes of today. Facilitating all that was another new popular medium: television. Television basically usurped both radio and cinema as a center of family leisure time, and took many of their features, as well as inventing its own. Radio was seemingly left for dead, but it didn't die, because once the tight government control was lifted, it saw the rise of the personality DJs. The DJs, like the rock and roll stars, became figureheads to a group of like-minded people, offering them either a certain taste in music or a certain political worldview. In cinema, these changes caused a greater emphasis on the art of movie making, resulting in a shift away from the stars and towards the directors. Actors would no longer have just one image that they portrayed in every movie, but were expected to play many different characters. Cinema now started to be considered a serious art form, and the directors as artists, but it was also still a popular form, very much connected to the spirit of the time, and the rock and roll period was the period of its greatest masterpieces. Cinema dramatized the collapse of the modern utopian dream, and also the struggles of pop culture to create an alternative. In the late 60s, the rebellious nature of rock and roll led pop music to start focusing on identities. Ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, and women used music to rebel against the modern image of the enlightened man, built around the straight white male, and present new possible identities. And that was reflected in comic books as well, which entered the so-called Bronze Age. Superhero comics were perfectly suited to deal with issues of identity. Created mainly by American Jews who used them to express the duality in their soul between their Jewish and American identities, and also to express their dreams of heroism while being a persecuted minority, these superheroes knew all about these problems. The comics of the Bronze Age went back to deal with dark themes, like in the Golden Age, and reflected the social struggles of the 70s and 80s. At the same time, when the alternative worlds created in science fiction and fantasy started to enter TV and cinema, we saw the rise of the fandoms. This was a different kind of identity, an identity that escaped the modern world and formed a culture that existed in an imaginary world. And it was another step on the way to today's universes. By the late 1980s, the realization that we are not heading towards a perfect society became commonplace. Rock music, which in the 60s got loaded with some modern utopian dreams and believed it could succeed where modernism failed, now became cynical. In comic books, this led to the rise of what is known as the modern age of comic books, in which the themes got even darker, and the definitions between good and bad less clear. In cinema, this led to the realization that people are no longer interested in the same old stories meant to help us become more enlightened and progressed, but want different and unexpected stories about life in the postmodern world. For a discussion of that period, check out my video on Quentin Tarantino. From the mid-1990s to the mid-2000s, there was another paradigm shift, and we entered what I shall call the Internet period. The rise of the Internet and online communities led to some seismic shifts in pop culture. First of all, pop music is no longer the center of it. Rock and roll, and all the many styles that came out of it, developed a snobbish attitude, and started to detach from the spirit of the time. For reasons which I am not going to fully discuss here, pop music no longer develops, no longer produces new styles, and no longer matters like it used to do. One reason is that the identity battles achieved full victory and became mainstream politics. Western society is now committed to full equality for all people, and erasing the biases that they might encounter due to their ethnicity, gender or sexual orientation. That means that there's nothing left to rebel against on this front. Moreover, we now have to deal with many academic departments who were built specifically to fight against identity biases. But now that there are no serious problems left, they are inventing imaginary problems, and producing loads of social justice warriors just looking for a reason to name someone a bigot and then take them down. And comic books, which, as we mentioned, were already focusing on social and identity issues, were therefore ripe for a hostile SJW takeover. The SJWs are trying to use comic books to spread their values, but all they are doing is destroying this branch of pop culture. Cinema also lost power. Once CGI was invented, and anything became possible, it stopped developing. On the other hand, television has now established itself as a serious art form, while still being part of pop culture. Once the demand came to tell original stories, not stories that have the usual 3-act structure, directors realized that the television series medium is a lot more suitable than the feature film medium. Television is now at the height of creativity, producing many masterpieces. But the main creative force of the internet period is, of course, the internet itself. First, it generated its own creative mediums, namely the internet video and the internet meme. But it also gave the fandoms a place to develop, and the alternative worlds expanded. One result was that the stories now became mythologies, meaning that there are many stories belonging to the same world and created by many authors. It used to be that every world had just one creator: Tolkien for Lord of the Rings, Roddenberry for Star Trek, Lucas for Star Wars, etc. Gradually, other people started to write stories within the worlds they created, and some of those stories became canonized. In the internet period, this process proliferated, and the worlds became universes, where the creative process is a community thing. The people living in these universes are constantly creating new stories and memes, and the universes expand more and more. Which opened up the way for cinema to remain relevant, as the realizer of those universes. Thus, we find ourselves where we are today. But this is only the beginning, because the universes will truly come to life only when video games become an integral part of them. Video games started in the rock and roll period, but were considered nothing but games. Now that we are creating universes in which the line between the artist and the audience is blurred, in which the consumers of the art are actually taking an active role, it is possible to think of games as art, and the video game is emerging as the most important artistic medium of the period. There are already video games created within the universes, or even serving as platform for a universe, but the assumption is still that the general public isn't playing them, so they can't be used to develop the story. In the future, I expect that part of the story of the universe will be told through video games, meaning that we will become part of it, and advance the plot through our own actions. But this is just the beginning, because the more the technology of virtual reality and the cyberspace will advance, the more immersive these universes will become, and we will actually be able to spend a big part of our time in them. We will probably even find work there. Imagine, for instance, that the code of a multiplayer online game will be open just enough for you to be able to forge your own weapons. You will then be able to open a store in that universe and sell those weapons. And when this happens, you will naturally want to attract more players into that universe, so you will hire artists to create interesting stories for them to play, architects to make the environment more appealing, etc. The more people visit this universe, the more it will draw others to sell their products there, and so forth. While robots increasingly do the jobs of the real world, humans will find jobs inside their dream worlds. Which means that these universes will actually start to matter more than the so-called real world. In other words, I foresee a future in which our current universe will serve mainly as a portal to those other universes. Which might also help solve this SJW problem. I think one of the major reasons for this problem is that some young people need a cause to fight for to find meaning in their life. But in today's Western society, alas, it's hard to find a true cause to fight for, so the SJWs have to invent problems that aren't really there. One reason why the modern age is over is that it actually succeeded, not in creating a perfect society, but in creating the best possible human society. The Western society of today does not require general overhauls, just minor fixes, and the only thing left to do is to defend it from anti-liberal people who want to destroy it, such as the SJWs. By creating alternative universes that matter, we can also create causes worth fighting for, and give the youth something meaningful to do. and that is why I explore pop culture. The only thing high culture has to offer is monuments of a glorious past. Pop culture, on the other hand, is a joyous celebration of the present, and even more than that. The MCU movies are a lot of fun, and that is how they should be experienced. But, lurking beyond all the flashy style, the thrilling action and the witty comedy, I see in them the glimmer of a glorious future.